Hi guys, welcome to Unit 5, Chapter 2, where we will be learning about protists and fungi. Most of us are familiar with fungi as mushrooms, but it actually is a very large kingdom that covers a very diverse set of organisms. And then protista or protists are microorganisms that share characteristics with lots of different other kingdoms. So let's talk about protists first. So, proto, much like prototype, means the first. And zoan, much like zoo, okay, means animal. So the word protozoan means the first animal. But that's a little misleading because only some of them are considered animal-like protists. We also have plant-like protists that have characteristics of plants, and we have fungus-like protists that have characteristics of fungi. The hypothesis is that these are very primitive organisms. They're microorganisms, usually unicellular organisms. They are only one cell large that share the characteristics of the kingdom which they will eventually evolve into. For instance, we believe that the plant-like protists are very primitive, pre-evolved plants, or that the protista then evolved later into those plants. So let's talk about the diversity of kingdom protista. It's incredibly diverse. Like I mentioned before, we have some protista that share a lot of characteristics with fungi. They behave like fungi. Their genetics are similar to fungi. They have different characteristics that classify them as fungi-like. The one that we're going to focus on most is animal-like protozoans. These are microorganisms that share characteristics, genetics, and other behaviors with animals. Now, animals is a very huge kingdom with lots of diversity. Things like a sea sponge is considered an animal. So these protistas are going to have those kinds of characteristics. And then the other one is going to be plant-like. These are things like algae that are very similar to plants, and their main characteristic is that they can photosynthesize. So they are autotrophs that have that green pigment chlorophyll that helps them to photosynthesize. But most of kingdom protista, no matter what we're talking about, are going to be unicellular. Now, there are some that form large colonies and can be considered multicellular, but most of them are going to be unicellular. These are considered very ancient organisms, meaning they haven't changed a whole lot, but that doesn't mean that their descendants don't also exist on Earth. For instance, algae is hypothesized to have evolved into plants many billions of years ago. All of them are microscopic, of course, except for the large colony forming ones. We can see them with our eyes when they form those large colonies, but each individual single-celled organism is going to be too small for you to see with your eyes. Some of them can cause disease, meaning they are pathogenic, and some of them may have a cell wall, and it may not be the type of cell wall that you think. So just because it's a plant-like protista does not mean it will have a plant-like cell wall. Most of these protistas are going to be motile, meaning they have some form of mobility at some stage in their life cycle. So, looking at this image, which one of these organisms most resembles an animal or could be considered an animal-like protist? Right away, I'm going to eliminate the green ones because if they're green, they probably undergo photosynthesis. So I'm going to mark these out. Right away, I see these right here. These really resemble animal-like cells. When we are learning about the cell, the amoeba is considered the largest single-celled organism in some cases. So this is definitely going to fit the animal-like characteristic. This one is also animal-like, and we'll talk about it later. So let's look at the groups of animal-like protistas. The first group is called sarcodine. Sarcodine includes the amoeba. Sarcodines move using a pseudopod. A pseudopod is a projection of their cell membrane because they have lots of little contractile filaments along their membrane or their cell membrane, allowing them to move and change shape. And it can also help them consume food. by phagocytosis. So these are going to be small pseudopods. The next group is called a ciliate. Ciliates, like the paramecium, move using these very small hair-like projections. They don't move very fast, but they have a lot of skill. They can move pretty much freely wherever they want to. And the paramecium has this funnel-like mouth. So as it moves through the water, it will collect and catch little bits and food particles that it then can digest. So paramecium is an example of a ciliate. Next, we'll talk about the flagellates. The flagellates have a flagellum. Now, euglena is actually plant-like. You see this green pigmentation, which tells me this is plant-like, but it's a good example of a flagellate, because it has a flagellum. It has this whip-like tail structure. The last group is a sporozoan, aptly named because they form spores. We'll talk about the sporozoans last, and as we talk about animal-like protists, these are very pathogenic. A lot of them are parasitic and cause disease. So we'll talk about the sporozoans. First, pseudopods, or the sarcodine. Pseudo meaning false and pod meaning foot. If you go to the podiatrist, you're going to the foot doctor. So the pseudopod means false foot. This is an extension of the cell membrane. It can change shape very easily. It can assist in mobility and phagocytosis. They can form shells, almost like a seashell. It's an excretion around its body that hardens. And these pseudopods, as the ancient pseudopods died and collected in these certain areas, they became compressed to form things like limestone or chalk. So a lot of those sedimentary rocks have ancient pseudopod shells making up most of their calcified material like limestone. This does include amoebas, including one variety of amoeba that is a parasite or a brain-eating amoeba. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Next, we're going to talk about ciliates. Again, here's an image of a paramecium. Here you can see the little food funnel, and the food funnel attaches directly to a vacuole. These vacuoles will actually switch places and then help to digest the food and then eject it out of this end. But it just kind of swims around in the water and collects little bits of food particles where it can digest it. The main characteristic of the paramecium is this little cilia. The cilia not only help it to move around, but help it to attach to surfaces. Paramecium. All right, next we can talk about the flagellates, but I really like to call them zooflagellates because you don't want to mix them up with other types of flagellates that are actually plant-like Protistas. So if we're talking about zooflagellates, we're particularly talking about animal-like Protistas. Now, a flagellum is a whip-like structure. It's made out of microtubules, like long, twisted tubulin, which is a type of protein. And then at the base where it connects, there's this spinning motion. So it actually spins around like a propeller. Most flagellates have one or two flagellum, but as you can see here, some of them have many. Flagellates are known to be symbiotes, meaning they have relationships with other organisms, and they usually benefit from that relationship. Some of their hosts don't really notice them, but many of them are mutualistic, meaning the host also benefits from this relationship. Some of them, however, are pathogenic and cause disease, such as Giardia. Giardia is a flagellate that actually causes dysentery or very extreme diarrhea. All right, sporozoans. Let's look at this image for a second. This is a blood smear, which means this little circle is a red blood cell. These are the smallest cells in our human body. They don't even contain a nucleus. They're kind of stripped down versions of your cells, which means they don't have a long life. They only live for about 60 days. But here, very clearly, you can see this parasite or a trypanosome. This is an animal like Protists that can cause Chagas disease and African sleeping sickness. So that family of trypanosomes kind of have this weird squiggly structure. And they are always going to be parasitic. Now, they spend part of their life cycle in human body fluids, consuming human body fluids, but they also produce spores or little zygotes that can then be transferred. They're reproductive parts that can be transferred from one host to another through a vector. A vector, spelled like this, Vector, is usually going to be an insect like a tick, a mosquito, or in the case of African sleeping sickness, it's a tsetse fly. And when that tick or mosquito bites you and drinks your blood, it takes up these parasites and their spores, and then it can start its life cycle over, finding a new host. Another sporozoan that you might be familiar with is the sporozoan which causes malaria. All right, so if we are looking at this picture, it says which of these protists have something called a false foot? Well, what I'm going to look for is pseudopod, false foot, so sarcodeme. And here we have an image of an amoeba under the microscope. This one says a whip-like tail helps it to move around, so I'm definitely talking about a flagellate or a zooflagellate. It should have one or two flagella. Some have many, but here you can see the flagella on right here. This one is usually a it's a bloodborne disease that's usually transmitted by a vector like a mosquito. In this case, we're talking about sporozoans. So I mentioned that some of these microorganisms are pathogenic. So what I want to do is look at some of these pathogens. If you click on this image, you will come to this interactive. It's just one page, but as you hover over each one, you need to learn about each of these diseases because there are test questions in which any of these diseases could pop up and you would need to be able to identify it. For instance, Giardia is a flagellate. It is a zooflagellate and it has this distinctive mirrored shape. But the question is going to ask you about dysentery. Which of these protozoans causes dysentery? And you will be able to say Giardia. We also have Plasmodium. Plasmodium is the microorganism which causes malaria. And then we have Toxoplasma gondii. This is the reason why we tell pregnant women not to change cat litter because this is mainly an infection that cat owners get from cat poop. We also have ick. If you've ever had a freshwater aquarium, then you may have seen some white spots on your fish. And this is also a protozoan called Ichthyophyterius. I am so sorry, guys. It's commonly called ick because most people can't pronounce that. Here we have the trypanosomes. Trypanosomes cause Chagas or African sleeping sickness. Leishmania tropica is going to cause leishmaniasis, which can cause lesions on the skin. Trichomonas is going to cause a vaginal infection, but it's actually very responsive to antibiotics. So even though this is a protozoan parasite, it does respond well to antibiotics. And then the last one is going to be Naegleria or Naegleriasis. This is the brain-eating amoeba that lives in warm freshwater lakes. So some people will contract this after going swimming, usually during the summer because that's when the water is warmer and that's when these amoebas have a bloom or their population boom. And it can cause death because it causes inflammation of the brain. So become familiar with these diseases because you might run into a question on the exam about these parasitic diseases. All right, now tell me which of these resemble plants. This should be easy because plants have a special pigment called chlorophyll, which allows them to undergo photosynthesis, which is a green color. So any of these green organisms, even though they're flagellated, they have flagella. They can move around. And in fact, this one, Euglena, actually has a little eye spot. This is the nucleus. This isn't the eye spot. It has an eye spot. This one behaves a lot like an animal like Protista, but it has chlorophyll. So it is characterized as a plant like Protista. And this one too. This one has a hard outer shell, and it has one or two little flagella, usually two flagella. This one's called a dinoflagellate. So let's explore some plant-like protists. Plant-like protists can be or they're mostly unicellular. They can grow quite large in these multicellular colonies. Um, algae is the one that's going to be multicellular. All of the other ones are going to be microorganisms. Sorry, this is also plant-like. It has the green pigmentation. All right. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but they all share that they are autotrophs. They make their own food due to photosynthesis. One of the byproducts of photosynthesis is oxygen, breathable oxygen, O2, which means these protistas, these plant-like protists, are responsible for 70% of the Earth's oxygen. So if you've heard that saying that the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the Earth, it's not necessarily true. Actually, these protists are the lungs of the Earth, which means the ocean produces most of the world's oxygen just from photosynthesis. Let's look at the different groups. The first group that we have are euglenoids. Euglenoids are very similar to animal-like protists, except that they photosynthesize. So we'll talk about them in a second. Then we have something called diatoms. We actually looked at an image of diatoms a couple weeks ago in lab. Diatoms are very unique, very beautiful little microorganisms that humans actually use a lot in industrial or for commercial purposes. Dinoflagellates. Dinoflagellates are really cool. They are flagellated. They're the ones that are kind of hard shelled. These guys right here. And they can actually glow. They can bioluminesce. And the last category is algae. Algae comes in a bunch of different forms, a bunch of different colors, but they all are very closely related to extant plants. So they're very similar to plants, and we'll talk about algae last. So first, the euglenoids. Euglenoids are very, very unique. They can consume food like an animal like protist, but for the most part, they're going to photosynthesize using the chloroplast. They do have this bright red nucleus right here, and they actually have an eye spot. The eye spot doesn't see like you and I can have vision and see. The eye spot is sensitive to light, which allows it to respond to night and day cycles. They are autotrophic because of the chloroplast, but like I mentioned, they can also consume food. So very, very unique euglenoids. They share a lot of characteristics with those animals, including they do not have a cell wall. So most plant-like protists are going to have a cell wall, not the euglenoids. What's unique about the euglenoids is that eye spot. Next is diatoms. There are many different species of diatoms, and here you can see in the image they are very beautiful, but they are microscopic. They excrete a very hard cell wall that looks like glass, and under the microscope it has these beautiful vivid colors depending on how light hits it. Now, ancient diatoms or dead diatoms can often be collected in deposits called diatomaceous earth. Easy to remember because diatom is in this word diatomaceous earth. And this is a very coarse powder. It's made of these microscopic shells. It's not the live organism, it's just their cell wall. And this is used in anything that is like slightly abrasive, like car polish or toothpaste, and even reflective paint because of those bright, beautiful colors and that glass-like cell wall. They are mainly found in the ocean. They are aquatic. Next is dinoflagellates. Now, dinoflagellates are super cool. You can actually order these online and keep them in a fish tank, though they can cause a die out due to a large bloom. This is called red tide. But what actually happens is these small dinoflagellates have a large bloom or a population boom, and then they suck all the nutrients out of the water, causing everything else to either leave or die. So this can be harmful if they grow in these large colonies. But what makes it really, really special and unique is that they are bioluminescent, or actually chemoluminescent, because they use a luciferase reaction. When they're agitated, the luciferase mixes with a magnesium and causes it to glow. This is very similar to the reaction in fireflies. So they are chemoluminescent. They can bioluminesce on their own. In fact, organisms that otherwise are bioluminescent but not chemoluminescent, it may be because of a symbiotic relationship between the bioluminescent dinoflagellate and that larger organism. They do have flagella. They have two flagella, though they might be hard to see. They are inside of this hard armor-like cell wall. The cell wall is very, very strong, and then the flagella is down in the middle of this cell wall, like down here. And what actually happens is this causes the dinoflagellates to kind of move around in circles. They just spin. They don't move very well. They do move, but it's more of a spinning motion. I'm going to show this video. I know that it's going to mute me while I show the video, but I want you to see what dinoflagellates look like. This is just a couple of tourists who are at the beach. You are not guaranteed dinoflagellates anywhere that you go, but there are certain beaches that are more prone to having these blooms of dinoflagellates. And like I mentioned, you can actually order them online and put them inside of a fish tank, or some people put them in like little fountains so that when they're agitated, they glow. Let's see if I can actually press play. So as she's stepping on the beach, she's agitating the dinoflagellates and they are glowing. This is not make-believe. This is not a CGI. This really happens in real life, and you can look up tons of videos online about this. Or as I mentioned, you can buy your own and you can see this in real life. So very interesting microorganisms. All right, let's switch gears. Algae. Algae is the closest to plants. They're the most plant-like. Many of them are not motile. Some of them are single-celled, but some of them are multicellular or colonial. They form leaves and stems, but they are not like the leaves and stems of plants. They're more rudimentary. It's more of the same cell just forming this pattern, this body pattern. They can form large colonies as well. Here you see pond scum, which is just algae, single-celled algae that has collected in these large patches. You can find them in any aquatic environment, freshwater, saltwater, in damp mud, in ponds, in swamps. You find them everywhere. Green algae is everywhere and very closely related to plants. But green algae is not the only type of algae. There's also red algae. We use it in food to create kind of a smooth texture. It can also be used in hair conditioner, and this is only in marine environments, so only in the ocean we would find this. And these are multicellular. Then what I find interesting is brown algae. It's not always brown. Sometimes it's orange or even black. Still, it's going to be autotrophic. It can attach to rocks, but this is the kind of stuff that you see washed up on the beach. And it actually forms these little bubbles. If you see, it's hard to see in this picture, but there's these little bubbles that are actually little bubbles of air that help it float on the surface of the water. and the surface of the water is going to get the most sunlight. This is also why it ends up washing up on the beach. So if you've ever gone to the beach and there was tons of algae, that's what it is. It's sometimes called kelp, but it's brown algae, and it's not actually a plant, it's a protist. We do use it in food thickener. In fact, last week when we did our auger plates, the auger is made out of this algae. All right, which of these protists have a green pigment? So they do photosynthesize, they have chlorophyll, but they do not, be careful about that word not, they do not have a cell wall. Well, we know that this one has an armor-like cell wall. We know this one has a glass-like cell wall. We didn't really talk about the cell wall of algae, but it's very plant-like. The one that does not have a cell wall is going to be the euglenoid. The euglenoid is very similar to animal-like Protistas. In fact, it has a flagellum and it can consume food, but it also is an autotroph. It has chlorophyll. All right, which one of these has many different types of pigments and can form large colonies? Well, all of these are very unicellular, unicellular, unicellular. This is the one that forms large colonies or could be multicellular. So seaweeds or algae. All right, and this one is talking about a glass-like cell wall. The cell wall is like glass, which is going to be this one, diatoms. We can use this diatomaceous earth or a bunch of collected dead diatoms in things like toothpaste or abrasive creams like a polish. Last one, this one has a very strong cell wall. It also has a flagella and it can glow in the dark. So the dinoflagellate is the last one. All right, looking at these, which most resemble fungi? Well, we know these are plant-like. We know that these are animal-like. Animal-like. I'm not sure about this one. I'm not sure what this one is. It kind of looks like some dinoflagellates, but I'm not sure. But these three are very fungi-like. They look kind of like fungi at the microscopic level. So let's talk about fungi like protists. So fungus-like protists are always heterotrophic. They can't photosynthesize. They eat other things. Mainly, they're going to eat detritus material or like dying and decaying things, but they also consume like the microorganisms or bacteria that is growing on top of that detritus material or dying material. They do have a cell wall, but it's made of chitin. Chitin. That's horrible handwriting. I'm so sorry. Chitin. I'll talk about chitin in a little bit. Many of them are mobile at some point in their life cycle, but not this part of their life cycle. So maybe when they're in their juvenile state, they will have a flagella or have some sort of mobility. They do reproduce with spores or little tiny zygotes that they release into the air. So they do have spores, and there are two main types that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about slime molds, which you see here in this image, and then we're also going to talk about water or downy molds. So the water molds is the other thing that we're going to talk about, and that's in this image. So first, let's talk about water molds. Of course, they have to live near or in water, anything moist. If there's not moisture around, it's going to live on an organism that's going to provide that moisture, such as a potato. So the Great Irish Potato Famine was actually not caused by a fungus. It was caused by a water mold, which is not a fungus. It is a protozoan. It is a fungus-like protist. Here you can see on this dead fish, these long white stringy things. That is the water mold. Okay, so very aggressive type of mold. Mainly a concern for food crops. What I really want to talk about though is slime molds. They're going to reproduce by fruiting bodies, which is very similar to how real fungi reproduce. Here you can see the little fruiting body. They do contain spores, which are little zygotes that are going to be caught by the air and allow this fungus to spread, or this slime mold. It is not a fungus, it's fungus-like slime. When they're juvenile or when they're single celled, they may resemble an amoeba, but once they form these large colonies, they no longer resemble an amoeba and they are more similar to slime. They like moisture. They have to have some kind of moisture, but they're not aquatic. Okay, they can live on like moist, dead, and dying logs. Um, Definitely want somewhere shady. They don't like the direct sunlight. What's interesting about them is that they can use these slime molds as models for other organisms. So one of the things is that they can model the human brain and the plasticity of the brain. But in the next video that you'll see, it's actually modeling the Tokyo subway. If you would like to watch this video with sound, that's great. You can go back to the PowerPoint and watch it. But in this video, I think I'm going to be muted. I'm not sure. Studies. Looking forward, what do you think is the biggest organism ever? We have gone over microorganisms and unicellular organisms. What do you think is the biggest organism? Is it a dinosaur? Is it the great blue whale? Or is it the coastal redwood? Well, it's none of these things. It's actually a mushroom called the honey mushroom. Now, this little fungus cap that you see here is not actually the entire organism. This is just the fruiting body or just the sexual part of the plant. I'm sorry, it is not a plant. It is a fungus. What you actually have is similar to plant roots, we have something called mycelium under the ground, and these are vast, vast networks of mycelium, which is the actual body of the fungus. This is just one piece that pops up every once in a while. This is not the main organism. The main organism is actually underground, and in the case of the honey mushroom, can take up 2,000 acres of space. So, what is the basic structure? Well, the main part of the fungus is the mycelia, which are these white hair-like structures that are going to be underground or inside of a dying log. They do have a cell wall made out of chitin, which is really similar to the exoskeleton of insects. They also store their food or their sugar as glycogen, very similar to animals. So very different from plants. In fact, they are not related to plants at all. They're their own kingdom, their own thing. Now, what is mycelium made out of? Well, mycelium is made out of something called hyphae, which are the cells that make up the fungus. Now, hyphae are going to be individual cells that make up the branched structure of the mycelium. Some of them are septate hyphae, which means there is one single nucleus for each cell, and they're separated by a septum or septate. There are also non-septate hyphae, which the entire branched structure or the entire structure is going to be one cell kind of fused together, all these tiny cells. So they're multinucleated or multinucleated, sorry, multiple nuclei in one cell called non-septate hyphae. Now, yeast do not form mycelia. They are single-celled fungus, single-celled fungi, but they can form pseudomycelium where they kind of link together in these long chains. This part of the cell is not the main part of the fungus. This is the fruiting body or the sporocarp. There will be gills or pores underneath the cap that will allow the zygote spores to come out and be carried by the wind. The main body of the organism is going to be this mycelium underneath the ground or inside of the dead log that it's eating. Both the mycelium and the sporocap, or the fruiting body, are made out of the hyphae. It's just the fruiting body has a very compact hypha, which are in this like mushroom shape. Now, not all fungus form mushrooms. We'll talk about the different types of fungi. Many of them do not form this classic fruiting body mushroom shape, but some of them do. And we do need to know the anatomy of the ones that do. Here we have the cap. Underneath the cap is going to be gills or pores. It doesn't have to be gills. Sometimes it's little holes, little pores, but both of them do the same thing. Inside the cap are little zygotes that form spores, and then when this fruiting body matures, the wind will take those spores and carry them to a new location. This stem-like structure is called the stipe, okay? And some of them have a skirt, not all of them. It's a ripped off piece of this vulva, but not all of them have a skirt. They do, any mushroom forming fungi is going to have a stipe. But remember, underneath is the mycelia, and the mycelia is the main part of the fungus. All right, reproduction. Now, each different type of fungi is going to reproduce in a different way, but for the most part, there are two main life cycles of a fungus. Again, yeast is going to be a whole different thing. Yeast actually reproduce by budding. So we have one nucleus. It's going to kind of form this little baby bud, and that bud will grow bigger, and then it will become its own second clone. Now, normal fungi can also produce clones because they have an asexual life cycle. So let's look at the bigger version of this. They have an asexual life cycle where one of these hyphae becomes activated, and it will go through mitosis, forming a zygotic spore, and then that spore will be carried through the wind until germination, which it just kind of lands on the ground and germinates new mycelium. It will be an exact copy or an exact clone of its parent. But if two mycelium that are genetically unique kind of reach each other, so we have, one fungus over here of the same species and one fungus over here of the same species. This is mycelium, guys. And they just happen to reach out and touch. At the point that they touch, it will create this heterokaryote. A heterokaryote means a cell that will have two genetic parents, two genetic nuclei, basically. It will undergo karyogamy, where the nuclei fuse to form a zygote, genetic material from two different parents, or two in. So at this point, once they fuse, these are going to come together and fuse into one zygotic hypha. So just one single cell that has two copies of the DNA. It is a zygote. That will have to undergo meiosis, and that will form into spores, which will then germinate just like the asexual spores did. But these will be genetically unique. This is a form of sexual reproduction. So most fungi can go through both sexual and asexual depending on the conditions. Now let's talk about fungus in general. Fungus is a hugely diverse kingdom. We have these fungus that form mushroom caps. We have microorganisms that are also fungal. Lots of different types of fungi, but they all share some characteristics. For instance, they are all multicellular. They're all eukaryotes. They're very closely related, or they're more closely related to animals than to plants, and they are all heterotrophic, but they don't eat. They don't have mouths. They don't have the digestive system. What they do is they actually excrete enzymes outside of their mycelium, and then they will sit there and absorb the nutrients from that digested detritus material. This is called a saprobe. They are all saprobes or decomposers. They're going to decompose dead material. So most of them are saprobes unless they are in a mutualistic relationship with a host organism, such as a plant. So some of them do exist as mutualistic inside of plants, in which case they would not be a decomposer or a saprobe. All right, let's talk about the main families. Kingdom fungi contains over 80,000 species of different types of fungi, but they are categorized in 5 main ways. The main ones that you and I are used to seeing are going to be Basidiomycota and Ascomycota. These are the 2 main families. These are known as club fungi and sac fungi. This is actually hollow. There's a hollow space inside of it. We also have glomerulomycota, which are those symbiotic relationships with plants. They all have symbiotic relationships with plants. Zygomycota are your things kind of like bread molds, spore molds. They are microscopic. You can't see them with your eyes, but then these little thingies will explode, releasing spores into the air. Your black mold that can make you sick will be a zygomycota. And the last one are the citrids. They're kind of their own thing, and we'll talk about them separately. Now, fungi are most closely related to kingdom Animalia. They share a lot of characteristics, such as chitin and the sugar glycogen. The easiest way to remember this is the ABCs. A, B, C's of fungus. And then you have the Z, ABC, and then the Z at the end, Zygomycota. But this image is kind of out of that order. So we're going to go in the order of the image when we talk about these. Again, we call these the club fungi, the sac fungi. These symbiotes are often referred to as AM fungi or arbuscular mycelia. Arbuscular mycelia are those symbiotes. Zygomycota are called zygomycota because they form those zygotic spores, and then citrids. Now, what are yeast? Yeast are a fungi. Some yeast are categorized as Basidiomycota and some are categorized as Ascomycota. But yeast are very unique, so I kind of put them down here because they share characteristics of both, but they are single-celled organisms and they kind of behave a little bit differently than the other fungi. So let's talk about Basidiomycota first. This is about 20,000 species of different fungus. Some of them form these fruiting bodies, these mushroom caps. Some of them are shelf fungus, which grow on the sides of trees. These are going to have like little pores instead of gills. These have gills. Your puffballs are also Basidiomycota, and then your common yard mushrooms that make those little fairy circles are also Basidiomycota. Now, when I see this, I assume that there is actually fungus all in this grass and dirt, and then this little ring of mushrooms just pops up when it's really moist outside. Some plant diseases are caused by Basidiomycota, but for the most part, like these are some of the main ones that we eat. Most of them are septate hyphae. Most of them have septate hyphae, meaning they have individual cells in their hyphae with one nucleus each. Okay. Some of them are poisonous, so generally it's like not a good idea to just go out and eat a mushroom that you're not familiar with, but many of them are quite delicious. Now, sac fungi, Ascomycota. This is a huge family of fungi, about 60,000 species. So most fungi that you think of are probably Ascomycota. Most of them are saprotrophs. They are decomposers, and they can help decompose and break down some of those harder things that other organisms can't digest, like cellulose and lignin. They have septate hyphae, and many of them can be pathogenic or harmful to humans, such as Candida, which is a yeast infection. You can see it in this baby's mouth. It's sometimes called thrush. It can be painful. It can cause cracking and dry skin. It can cause itching and irritation. Your ringworm It is also called tinea. You can have it on your head when they call it tinea capitis, but it's still ringworm. It's not a worm. It's actually a fungus that grows on the skin. And it can even cause your skin to lose pigmentation temporarily, called tinea versicolor, because it can change the pigmentation of your skin. But things like athlete's foot and jock itch are also considered ringworm, and they are a fungal infection. Some plant diseases are caused by fungus, like ergot. Ergot is a fungus that grows on grains like wheat and corn. Some species of ergot, like the corn ergot, can be eaten by humans, but most of it is not. Like the wheat ergot's probably not a good idea. Now, some sac fungi can be quite beneficial, such as morels. Morels are those funky looking mushrooms with this weird stuff on top. I'll show you a picture in a second. And then truffles. Truffles are famously expensive. They can usually be found at the base of oak trees, and they're used in some foods. We also have some green molds that are used for fermentation. Fermentation such as soy sauce or kombucha is going to be due to a sac fungi. We also have penicillium, which is a mold and is used to make the antibiotic penicillin. So the penicillium fungus actually releases a toxin that kills bacteria, and we harvest the toxin. So we can culture the penicillium over and over and over again and grow this fungus and then steal the toxin from it and use that as antibiotics, because remember, fungi are much more similar to humans and animals than to plants or bacteria. So the toxin that the penicillium produces is not going to harm animals because they're so genetically similar, but it will harm the bacteria. We also have something called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. If you are a Spanish-speaking person, you know that cerveza means beer, and that's exactly what it's named after. It is used for fermentation to make beer and wine. When this fungus is in the absence of oxygen or sealed away from air, it will create ethanol. And so we use it to make alcohol. But if it has oxygen, it will actually create vinegar. So also other fermented foods and vinegars are used. We use yeast to make those. Yeast is also used in baking because one of the things that it makes as a byproduct is carbon dioxide, which helps bread to rise. All right, so here is a picture of the truffle. Okay, so this is a truffle and this is a morel, and you can see it's hollow, that sac fungi characteristic here. All right, glomerulomycota, or sometimes called AM fungi or arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, are going to be a very small group of fungus. There's not many species, but the thing is that they're very widespread because they are mutualistic with plants. So many different types of plants have this fungus inside of their roots, and it actually really helps them. And here's an image. You can see the AM fungi right here that is growing inside of the cells of the plant. You can see it here. In fact, some of the earliest fossils that we have of fungi, because fungi generally don't lend themselves to fossilization, they are this type of fungus, AM fungus, that grow inside the roots. So we actually have the fossil of the plant root where we can see evidence of the mycorrhiza inside of the plant roots. And this is a great relationship for the plant and the fungi because the fungi has a nice protective area to live inside of the root, and it helps to increase the surface area and increase the absorption of nutrients for the plant. So a really great relationship for them. They are microscopic. You won't be able to see them with your eyes, but underneath the microscope, you can see them inside of the root of the plant. Now, there is another symbiotic relationship that fungi create called lichens. So, lichens that you see growing on rocks near the beach or on trees in the forest, this is a mutual relationship between fungus and algae, sometimes cyanobacteria. Anything that undergoes photosynthesis, really. So, the fungus is creating this nice protective layer, sealing in the moisture so that they grow on rocks and trees. They're not aquatic. But the algae that would normally be aquatic, or the cyanobacterium that would normally be aquatic, is protected. Now, the role that they play is that they can undergo photosynthesis. So the fungus really benefit from that photosynthesis, and they can consume the sugar that the algae or the cyanobacterium produce through photosynthesis, and the fungi protects and houses those cyanobacteria or the green algae. So the main partner here is the fungus, because the fungus is going to create the housing and attachment to the surface, such as the rock or the tree. There's many different kinds of lichens, but all of them are going to be a mutual relationship. The mycorrhizae also do something really weird. They could be asco or zygo or basidiomycota, but I want to talk about the mycorrhizae network, or the mycorrhizal network. So, for instance, here we have a beech tree and a spruce tree. Now, a spruce tree is an evergreen, so it is photosynthesizing throughout the winter. The beech tree does not photosynthesize during the winter, but it's really vigorous during the summer. And you will commonly see these two trees growing next to each other. And what's happening is there's a mycorrhizal network kind of growing in between the two of them. During the winter, when the spruce is photosynthesizing, the beech tree will actually suck nutrients away from the spruce tree. It kind of stresses out the spruce tree, but the spruce tree will survive. Now, the fungus is transferring that nutrients through its mycorrhizal network into the beech tree. The fungus is happy because during this process, it's stealing some of those nutrients. It's passing most of them along, but stealing some of them. So it's a really great relationship for everybody involved, because during the summer, when the beech tree is having its heyday, the spruce will steal nutrients from the beech tree. So you do commonly see these next to each other. The mycorrhizal network not only can help transfer nutrients, but it can also help transfer distress signals. For instance, if the beech tree becomes cold shocked and experiences cold, it might send a plant hormonal signal through the mycorrhizal network to other beech trees, not necessarily to the spruce trees, but to other trees in the forest. And that's why you see them all changing colors all at once. It sends a signal through that mycorrhizal network to stop producing the expensive pigment chlorophyll, because during the winter months there's not as much sunlight, and so they go through that dormant phase. The leaves turn red because that green pigment is disappearing and the red is shining through, but eventually even those red leaves will fall. And the tree will essentially become dormant due to that signal that it received from the mycorrhizal network. So something super cool. Last type of fungus that we're going to go over is the zygomycota. Or actually, this is the second last. Zygomycota create zygotes in these little spores. So this is an interesting drawing to me because it's way larger than bread molds actually are. This is what a bread mold looks like. You can't see the little individual puff balls at the end, but each of these little balls is going to have a bunch of spores that are zygotic spores, and they will help to spread that fungus. So if you ever do have a loaf of bread that has a little blue spot on it, don't just cut off that spot or throw that piece of bread away and still eat the rest of the loaf, because if there is one spot, as you see these rhizoids, those rhizoids are throughout the entire bread. By the time enough of them grow that you can see them, remember they are microscopic. By the time enough of them grow that you can see it, it's already throughout the entire bread. So just throw that away. We can view this little video. There's no sound. It's just a time-lapse video of this orange. So you can see in that video that it actually can decompose a dead or dying fruit in a pretty quick or a short amount of time. This is probably a week time lapsed. All right, the last fungus that we're going to go over are the citrids or the Citridiomycota. Now, these are the most primitive type of fungus. They are almost similar to the Protistas, and they're going to be everywhere, but the main place that they live is a mutualistic relationship with ruminants. Ruminants, like cows, are animals that have a chambered stomach and they kind of like ferment their food as they're digesting it. Now, this is a really great relationship for these larger organisms because not many organisms are capable of digesting things like cellulose, and cows mainly eat grass, which is mainly made up of cellulose. So these citrids are going to release digestive enzymes to help break down the cellulose, and then the cow can digest that broken down material. They are microscopic, but they can form spores and they can be pathogenic to some organisms, such as amphibians, because they can infect the skin of the amphibian. And then, as you may know from Biology 1, if you took Biology 1, the skin of an amphibian is very sensitive. It needs to stay moist and it helps them to actually absorb different things from the water environment around it and oxygen. So if their skin becomes infected with this fungus, they can suffocate and they have this reddened, irritated, or even sloughed off skin. Next class period, during lab this week, we are going to observe some pond water. So if you have me face to face, don't forget to bring a jar of pond water to class. If not, I look forward to sharing our experience through the weekly video. Don't forget that you do have a chapter laboratory write-up for each week. Don't forget to take your chapter quiz in Blackboard. And then, as always, you have this optional homework, which is a drag and drop activity that you may be able to turn in for extra credit later. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week.